Alright, I'm going to talk more about shit that I don't know anything about. So the 64-bit CPUs have been around since like the 70s, right? But in like home user computing, I still remember having a 32-bit computer back in the day. And 64-bit computers, like, I want to say it was probably when I had Vista, is like when I got a 64-bit computer. Before that I was running Windows 98. You know what I mean? So like in the home user market, those 64-bit CPUs are not a recent invention. That's really all you have to say about that. And so nearly nobody these days, besides like legacy systems, run 32-bit hardware or like a 32-bit CPU really. So because of that, Linux distributions and software vendors and Apple and Microsoft have slowly deprecated 32-bit. Win32 is still a thing, but very few programs run in Win32. And the main holdout is Steam. That's like partly the only reason that you have multi-lib enabled in your distribution. Which, by the way, you can bypass by using Steam as a Flatpak if that's available to you. If you can deal with the permissions bullshit. So Steam, however, people always assume that Steam needs 32-bit libraries because games can have 32-bit libraries, and this just isn't the case, right? Is that games will use their own libraries. The Steam client, however, needed 32-bit libraries because Windows 7 had 32-bit libraries. And so it needed to be, but since Chromium dropped support for Windows 7, now there actually may be no need for Chromium to have a 32-bit build. And that's kind of where the I guess I can't say like where the avalanche starts, but where it starts to pick up, because Apple hasn't supported 32-bit applications for a while now, and Windows 10 LTSC is the last version of Windows that has 32-bit system applications. So we have fully moved into the 64-bit era fucking 20 years later from when everybody got 64-bit CPUs. So it's had a good run, and now it is so old that the patent for it has expired. So now Chinese companies are making x86, computers or like motherboards and CPUs and stuff. I say motherboards, but like integrated, integrated motherboards. So because of that, though, now we have Debian dropping 32-bit support, which means that distributions like NTX are going to have a much harder time supporting 32-bit hardware, even though they have already had to put in a lot of effort giving the amount of support that they have for i686. And I think that's kind of gonna, they'll either have to rebase or they'll have to like work around Debian's bullshit, and like add their own 32-bit repositories or something, which they probably already have, honestly. So what does that mean for you as a multi-arch user? I don't really know yet, honestly. We still got another maybe 10-15 years before you'll start seeing, like, because in the Linux world we already have like non-multi-arch distributions that just run 64-bit applications, and you can enable multi-arch in your configuration or whatever. Kind of like Arch or Gentoo. My Gentoo install, I only enabled multi-arch because I assumed that something would need it, but honestly I probably don't, because I don't think anything I use is 32-bit besides Steam, which is a Flatpak. And that brought up a question, why does the Steam Linux client, which is native, why is it that also 32-bit? And honestly, I can't really tell you. You know what I mean? But I do expect Steam to, over the next, again, 20 years, go to 64-bit as Windows deprecates Win32. Because Windows kind of prides itself on backwards compatibility, but eventually we'll reach the point where they just don't need it anymore and they can somewhat debloat the operating system and replace it with something even worse. So once Windows deprecates Win32, then that'll be something different, but I'm expecting that to be in well past 2032, which is when 10 LTSC goes out of style, or, out of support. So that's kind of what I'm expecting, is that sometime in the next, that would be in the next 8 years, but I'm expecting it to be a lot longer than that before we see like the actual end of i686. Because, like, contrary to popular belief, despite using programming languages to make you can have 32-bit and 64-bit applications, and you should be able to target both architectures pretty easily. You do also have to maintain two versions of the same program. And I think a lot of software vendors are kind of catching on that they don't really need 32-bit applications anymore, so they can move on, And yeah, I think that as the last 32-bit computers are retired, and they'll have to like run some Linux distribution, one that supports 32-bit, because it's going to be harder and harder over the years to get the software that you need to run. Unless you're running old software, it'll be kind of a retro computing thing, basically. And honestly, it already kind of is. It is still supported for the time being, but I expect that to change in the future, as companies and software vendors are just like, yeah, we have very few people left running the software on 32-bit computers, so we're just not going to support it anymore. And I don't know if it'll remain the same in server land, because servers are a bit different from like home computers, where they are expected to run hardware made in like the 1970s and be interoperable with hardware made in 2024, So they need max compatibility. And I don't know if that's going to change either. I do kind of want to see how RISC-V goes, because I don't know, like, that's going to be more for server land, right? Like, people always think that RISC-V is going to be, like, the ARM killer or the x64 killer. And I don't think it is, because it's more focused on asynchronous computing, which is more used in servers because home users need more synchronous performance. But I don't know, it could end up being a situation of, like, corporate backing, where, I don't know, somebody decides to develop on RISC-V further. It could be Amazon, it could be Microsoft, it could be, I don't think it'll be IBM because they have a competitor. But who knows, they could deprecate their power architecture for RISC-V. I don't really know. I doubt it, though. I really highly doubt that. But this is more just about kind of the end of 32-bit applications, where I kind of see the end is near as applications drop support for Windows 7. And that was really especially even 8 and 8.1, which I kind of wanted to talk about that real quick too, because Windows 8 and 8.1 had a much shorter lifespan than Windows 7. Not like too long, because they still were supported until like 2021. But Windows 7 came out in 2008, and Windows 8 came out a bit later, like a few years later. So it was kind of weird to see all of them dropped at once, and they just went, full blown into Windows 10 and 11, and Windows 10's already being deprecated. So Microsoft's moving at a very fast pace, whereas over the past 10-15 years there's been sort of stagnation, where you were able to run legacy hardware and software a lot easier than you are now. And I think that's kind of a change in philosophy, really. And this is another thing I'll mention too, is Windows is sort of a relic of the past now. Or if you think about it, they are the only operating system that you have to pay for if you are not an enterprise customer. And that's not to say that you don't technically have to pay for macOS, but macOS comes with the hardware. You know what I mean? You buy a computer and it comes with the free operating system and you get the next version for free. But whereas with Windows, contrary to like Android or iOS or iPadOS or Linux, where the operating system's free and maybe you're paying for like Zorin OS or something, or you're paying for Red Hat. But if you're paying for Red Hat, you're probably an enterprise customer because they have a free version. You know what I mean? So like if you're a consumer, you can get a free license for Red Hat and you'll be fine. But for Windows, the only reason I can think of that it's so popular is because it just comes pre-installed on everything, which is why Chrome OS has started to take some of their market share, is because people will use what comes on their computer. And if companies are giving out Chromebooks instead of or government entities or schools or whatever are using Chromebooks or Chromeboxes, uh, they're not using Windows and they're not going to go out of their way to install Windows. And I think that's a mentality that people don't understand about computers, and why I say that Linux probably won't reach a huge market share, because to install Linux you need to either buy a computer with Linux pre-installed on it or you need to change it from Windows, and people just aren't going to do that. So that was kind of a tangent, but I really just wanted to talk today about the kind of the impending doom of 32-bit applications. I know that there's millions of computers out there that run 32-bit, not only operating systems but architectures, and I'm like, it's gonna depend. It'll really depend. I kind of see that being phased out as just those computers start to die. And it'll end up being more costly in the long run to continuously replace parts on a 32-bit computer than it is just to buy a new 64-bit computer and probably save yourself the money on the efficiency. So, but that'll be part of an upgrade process, which again will take many, many years as the people that worked on these machines all kind of die off and shit needs to be redone. Because like I said, in server world, you still got hardware running from like the 1970s and 80s and 90s. So, and that's like the backbone of the internet, which is very scary to think about, you know. But that kind of stuff probably won't change in our lifetime. Maybe the next generation will have to rebuild the internet from the ground up, and we'll see what happens. Well, that's about it. Thanks.